Hey everybody, welcome back to All Fiction is Fantasy. Daniel here. I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today on All Fiction is Fantasy, we are taking a look at Buried Screams, written by C. Dean Andersson, aka Asa Drake, and this was originally published in 1992. One of my goals with All Fiction is Fantasy is to be the only YouTube channel to have reviewed all of C. Dean Andersson's work. So far, we've taken a look at the Warrior Witch of Hell / Blood Song series, which I love. To me, that is S-tier sword and sorcery fiction. We've also reviewed The Lair of Ancient Dreams, a kind of supernatural romance meets fantasy and cosmic horror. And now we turn to one of his works of pure horror, and that is Buried Screams. Let's read a little bit about Buried Screams. It came from below. Stone Ridge was a peaceful, almost boring little dot on the Kansas prairie until the night a bottomless shaft mysteriously appeared in the town's cemetery and, one by one, something below began scaring the people of Stone Ridge to death. And knew just how to scare them. Carl, Beth, and Eric were all acquainted with fear. For years they'd been plagued with painful scars from their childhood. Terrible secrets that had long been buried, but something below wanted these three in its legion, and one thing it knew was how to unearth buried terror. Thrown into their worst nightmares, Carl, Beth, and Eric had no choice but to endure the horror unless they found the way out of the darkest pit they'd ever known. So Buried Screams is like a mix of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Slither. An ancient force of evil is unearthed and is slowly taking over the minds and bodies of a small American town. What is the evil? How long has its presence been around? What does it want? The book is briskly paced and plotted. Within it's only about 300 pages. There are something like 65 chapters, and I love short chapters. Things move along very quickly here. However, it still feels just a little bit too long, and the plot spins its wheels too much. There is too much repetition as one by one we read about how the evil entity is taking over the various people. At first, it's fun and exciting, but it starts to wear out its welcome. Luckily, the core cast of characters is fun and interesting. The book opens with a flashback of the main group of characters to when they were children. With this, I get hints of Stephen King's It in the prologue. We learn about some kind of abuse or horror that the characters experienced when they were children. Was this abuse and horror caused by the evil entity buried deep within the ground of Stone Ridge? As adults, the characters now come face to face with that evil. The two main characters, Beth and Eric, are a great couple. Eric is a horror author, and Beth is a total horror head. Often in works like this, when there are characters into genre stuff, especially horror, the fandom doesn't feel authentic. It feels more like an excuse for the author to impress the reader with their own knowledge. There was a trend during the early days of DVD horror for films to have characters with names like Romero, Carpenter, and Dario. It was a poor imitation of the kind of film geek encyclopedic knowledge on display by filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino. But in the wrong hands, it just comes off as the writer or director flexing their nerd knowledge. This is not the case with Buried Screams. Beth and Eric both feel like they are genuine fans of horror. And at the time it was published, in the early 90s, it was a lot harder to be a fan of horror, especially cinema, because of the lack of films available on VHS. Fans back then had to resort to underground tape trading, and Beth has that kind of knowledge. She actually impresses Eric, the horror author, with her own super secret collection of video nasties, including a very hard-to-find copy of Cannibal Holocaust. Unfortunately, as the plot is revealed, it really doesn't pay off. There is a weird tonal inconsistency with what is being portrayed. The force of evil is portrayed as being an ancient and mysterious force, but when it takes over people, they begin to talk in really dumb ways. They start saying things like, "The boss wants me to fix you up," or "He's been fixed up by the boss," with "fix up" being a substitute for taken over or possessed or something like that. The evil entity makes its thralls sound more like mobster goons and it ultimately betrays what is really going on. Because this is Andersson, because this is Asa Drake, you just know there's going to be some Viking lore going on. And by the end of Buried Screams, you could almost place this as an entry into a Bloodsong expanded universe series. The reveal kind of comes out of nowhere, and I don't think it really pays off. The book could also do with a little more violence, a little more gore, at least some body horror. I don't need it to be extreme or anything, but it felt really lacking in the goo department. Overall, this is an okay book. It's well written enough, it's tightly scripted, and the characters are fun and interesting. But ultimately, it's a bit confusing in its reveals and a bit tame in the horror. It's fast-paced and action-packed, but it really does lack that kind of gut punch that I'm looking for in a solid work of horror. So all right, you guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this review of Buried Screams by C. Dean Andersson, aka Asa Drake. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye.